Cool. Awesome. Thanks for having us. So just quick intro on myself. My name's Linda and I run a fund called Scalar Capital and previously was at Coinbase. Very excited about this discussion on DAOs with John and Kinjal. And so Kinjal and John, could you please kind of talk about a bit about your background and what you're working on with DAOs and why you are excited by DAOs?
Yeah, my name is John Palmer. I'm a software engineer and designer. Have worked as a designer and engineer at a few companies and founded a Solidity Tools startup back in 2017. But as far as it relates to this talk, I'm currently PMing for a group called Party DAO. It is a group building a product together that allows people to place collective bids on NFT auctions. And happy to dive more into it later. I think, well, yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there. That's my intro.
First of all, that's a really interesting example of DAO. I would love to hear a little bit more about how that got started and kind of what are the interesting things you've learned through that process. And then we can jump into talking about what are some creative use cases of DAOs when Kinjal's back.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, Party DAO specifically, yeah, this is the origin story moment. I guess if I'm sure you've seen, and probably a lot of people here have seen recently on Twitter or on Foundation or different NFT platforms, this behavior of groups of people coming together and pooling their money so that they can place massive bids and win NFT auctions. Maybe the most notable example recently has been Pleaser DAO placing $5 million bid on the Snowden NFT. And so the founder of Mirror, Dennis, had tweeted out this idea, what if there was just a product called Party Bid where you could just quickly spin up a DAO, pool money together, bid as a team, and then win an NFT together, eventually selling it and splitting the profits. And overnight, a friend of mine, Anish, built the smart contracts for this and just posted it on Twitter and ended up using those smart contracts to win an NFT auction with a friend later that week. So this kind of sparked excitement around this idea. And Dennis then created a crowdfund on Mirror to raise 25 Ether to build a DAO, to actually build a real, professional productized version of this same thing. And so 25 ETH ended up getting raised very quickly from maybe 50 or so contributors who then joined a token gated Discord together and started organizing to build that product. And that's kind of the origin story. The really cool thing about that for me has been that the people who've ended up in this group are actually amazing builders. So there's people like, Khalil, the designer from Uniswap, the designer of Uniswap, and, senior Solidity engineers from companies like Cello and Dharma and 0x. Then you've got amazing PMs and writers in there as well. So it's been really cool to see a group of talent that you could probably never recruit to one startup is now working together on something. And that definitely makes my ears perk up and be oh, that's kind of a cool competitive advantage around talent or something. And over the past few weeks, that group has elected a smaller team of about 7 people to design, write smart contracts, build a front end for this product, which is now about halfway through development. So yeah, I think that's the origin story. That's what's happening. And to me, in the announcement blog post for this thing, I kind of framed this as it's really cool because it's a DAO that builds products. And I think, hopefully when Kinjal's here and we start talking about DAOs more generally, I think it's a very loaded term. So it's cool to kind of break DAOs down into different, taxonomy of different use cases. And I kind of bucket this in this kind of unique spot right now. It's a DAO that builds products. I haven't really seen that before. So that's just a bunch of background on Party DAO.
That's awesome. This represents some of the parts of why I'm so excited about crypto and the really amazing things happening in the space. This is so cool. Hopefully we have Kinjal back. Well, I had a question about membership. So is membership open to anyone to be able to join this DAO? Do you have an application process? How do you think about the dichotomy of DAOs being super open to anybody, but also making sure you're filtering for high quality members?
Yeah, definitely. Well, right now, the initial membership was basically based on who contributed to the crowdfund. That was how tokens were initially allocated. And since then, it's a Discord server with a collab land bot, gating it by 10 tokens. So the only way to join the DAO right now is if a member sends you tokens. And that's happened quite a bit. Members have sent tokens to friends or people that they wanted to work on this project. And yeah, some of the people working on it now were just like invited via sending tokens, but that's the only way in right now. It's like, I guess you could say that's like membership referral or something. Now, technically, it's not something that's totally under the control of the DAO. Like if any member decided to kind of overrule and put the tokens on Uniswap, then people could buy the tokens and there would be like a market for entering. But no one's done that so far. And I think that kind of speaks to the alignment around the singular focus of like, we're here to build this product, not to like pump a token or not to just like kind of arbitrarily grow. I feel like all the members that have been added so far have been aligned around this idea of like the immediate goal is we are building a product that we are trying to ship. And so, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, it reminds me of one of your tweets where you talked about how DAOs are a very abstract concept and we should be thinking about them differently. Would love for you to kind of talk about that because I thought that was a really interesting tweet you had.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would even first link that back to something that I was thinking a lot about and wrote about earlier this year, which is like this term of a scissor label, which is rooted in like a Slate Star Codex post. But I think DAOs have become one of these terms where it's a term that we're all talking about, where we've all like agreed that this term is like a thing and we're all talking about it, and that's useful insofar as it's now like the Schelling point for conversations and action, and like it spurs things to get started. But even though that term has been established, no like canonical definition of a DAO has been established. So people are talking about the same term but assuming different definitions, and that's like not really a very useful way to talk about something. And so I think DAOs are in that camp right now, which is one thing that'd be cool here is talk about like different types of DAOs. Like some DAOs are smart contracts and that's all it is. Some DAOs are like a Discord server with members and it's like very much socially coordinated. Some DAOs are like governance tokens, like Uniswap's token, where there are on-chain governance mechanisms that also really rely on social coordination as well. Like these are all things people call DAOs.
Right.
The tweet that you're mentioning was, I think, the biggest fault of that kind of phenomenon is when you start talking about like, let's start a DAO, like we should do a DAO. And it's just like saying like, we should do a startup without deciding like what, yeah, it sounds great. Like what should the startup do? Like what's the idea? What's the purpose? And that was really my point, is that like any given DAO should have a job to be done and like a mission, and all of the things that you do with that DAO, like how you decide the membership structure, decision making, where you congregate, like what your criteria are for like participation, all of that will be designed around whatever that initial mission was. But if you just like start a DAO and then like, cool, we started a DAO, and then you kind of try to figure out what it's going to do, I think you just get like really messy coordination because there's like no initial incentive alignment or anything from the beginning. So I was just tweeting about that basically.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I fully agree with you there. Kinjal, would you be able to introduce yourself and talk about what you're doing in the DAO space and why you find DAOs really interesting?
Yes, sorry about that. Hopefully this is better.
It's better, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. So my name is Kinjal. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm an investor of Blockchain Capital, and then on the side, I teamed up with Sheets with Basics and Women Blockchain basically to launch a DAO called Crazy, which is focused on investing in female founders and crypto.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to talk about like just what are the most creative examples that you're seeing in the DAO space. I think it'd be really interesting to the audience to hear what are some cool examples happening right now. I mean, the space changes so quickly too.
Yeah, so some of the DAOs that I think are super interesting in the art space, nonprofit space, trying to basically come around and fund different audiences and different missions that don't necessarily see a lot of coordination and capital allocation in an easy manner. So I think a lot of the DAOs in that space in particular have stood out to me, and I think we're kind of at the tipping point where we're about to see a lot more.
And how about you, John?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think to me, DAOs are just like as the umbrella term, I feel like the commonality is like it's new ways of organizing people to, you know, coordinate around any given like goal or purpose. And I personally like think that the party DAO thing is interesting, like group of people building a product. I think, you know, the Pleaser DAO stuff is pretty cool too. That's like kind of a group of people that's bidding on art auctions, but typically in support of philanthropy. So it's this interesting kind of like, it's a brand, it's a fund, and it's also like a philanthropic organization. Again, just like blurring lines between different things that would typically have to be kind of these formalized separate institutions. And then, you know, the DAO term is like originating from decentralized autonomous organization. And I think originally the idea was that it was a smart contract with like rules on chain and like public functions that anyone could call. And to that degree, something that I recently thought was like a cool DAO was this thing called the Freaker Fortress, which, you know, there was this NFT game called Ether Freakers. I think it was just a hackathon project, but you know, there was this game where you could like fight NFTs against each other, basically. You know, they had attack and defense attributes, but someone built a smart contract. My friend Wilson actually built a smart contract on top of that game that let anyone send their character into the same contract. And then members of that group could vote to collectively attack and win the game by attacking with like the collective power of all of their characters in the game. And I think I just throw it out there as another like interesting DAO because there's no Discord, there's no Telegram. It was really just a smart contract that anyone in the game could opt into to like link up with just like public functions.
Wow, that's awesome. So that's publicly available. Anyone can.
Yeah. You can check out Wilson Cusack's Twitter. He was tweeting about it a bit a couple months ago.
That's awesome. Well, leading to my next question is, what are some use cases for DAOs that currently you haven't seen right now, but you would like to see exist in the future? Kinjal, do you have any ideas there?
Yeah, so I think like we started to see this with Party DAO where folks came together to like purchase an NFT. And I think what's interesting to think about in the DAO space, and I'm sorry about the background noise, is just like pop-up DAOs and how like DAOs can kind of differ on horizons. And so I think you're going to see a lot of experimentation there where maybe a DAO is somewhat temporary and has a particular purpose for a moment in time, but then kind of you know, completes that and then moves on.
I like that a lot. And especially we have so many more tools in the DAO space now that it's easier to spin these up and coordinate people really quickly. John, how about you? Any things you're super excited to look forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff Kinjal mentioned a minute ago around like nonprofits and artist stuff is really cool. Like I think maybe like the Mint Fund is like a cool example of like pulling together money for like gas costs for artists. And then I actually don't know all the details of the Mint Fund other than, you know, when it was first announced, I found it really interesting. But yeah, I think it's always hard to, it can always get tricky, you know, it can always get tricky to answer questions about DAOs because they can get so broad. It's like, you know, I'm trying to think of like what's specifically unlocked here. And I feel like a lot of it lately is around like pooling capital and directing it towards some like common goal. But I guess I could really imagine DAOs like kind of doing anything because it's just like a group of people coordinating around something. So it's hard to like limit what I can think of there.
Yeah, I mean, it'll touch upon everything. I feel like one area I'm actually excited by is just the idea of building up reputation in these DAOs and actually have that reputation like poured over to different DAOs. Like, hey, I've really built up and shown my work in this DAO, and then like that can maybe carry over. So I'm hoping somebody works more on the reputation side of things. And then, so Kinjal, you recently co-authored a piece with Cooper on the rise of microeconomies. I really love the piece. Could you kind of summarize what this trend is and what's a microeconomy, and how do you see this kind of being the future way that groups collaborate?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, Cooper and I co-authored a piece on the rise of microeconomies, and really what we were thinking about here is we have all this long tail of communities that are, spinning up online and have been spinning up for quite some time. And now they have a way to basically add a monetization layer through DAOs and through social tokens and different types of, just token economics more broadly. And so the way that we define a microeconomy is basically, maybe 100 or so folks in a community under $1 million market cap, and they're kind of doing something to create products, for a common mission. And so that's really how we thought about defining it. And I think it's going to allow for a lot of different smaller companies to create a product and generate revenue and be successful.
Nice. And I also had another thing that you wrote about that I thought was interesting to talk about was you had asked what makes something a DAO and not just an online community. So is it just the idea of just adding in financial incentives, or is there something more to that? Would be curious to hear from both of you. What are the differences between DAOs and online communities?
Yeah, I like to think about it as like a community with a bank account or a community with like a treasury to govern and some sort of on-chain revenue.
Yeah, to me, I don't know that I'd necessarily draw any distinction really. Like, I think this is like, I feel like when talking about like DAOs or communities or like any like kind of like, yeah, one of these like scissor labels, to use my terminology of like this really like loaded term that like people are centered on. I feel like that term is just like serving as like a vehicle for, or like a void that we can fill with a conversation about the phenomena that are actually interesting about like what we're noticing happening. So like, to me, I'm not as interested in saying like what's a DAO versus what's not a DAO, but more like what are the interesting behaviors that are making like this DAO term rise to like such a level of popularity, and then can we like break those down? And definitely like what Kinjal's saying is exactly that, which is like, yeah, like there's groups of people who are not like formally employed by or like, involved in like some, a legally identified organization, but they have collective control over some kind of resources. But to me, that's also something really interesting about what's happening with communities. Some friends of mine wrote an essay a couple of years ago called Headless Brands. And it's about this idea that like, particularly in Web3 protocols, there's no head of a brand. There's no singular voice pushing out like the Bitcoin brand, for example, or the Ethereum brand. Everyone can kind of like co-opt it and talk about it or like use the logo however they want. And that was already happening kind of before crypto because of the internet. Like, the internet made it so anyone could broadcast to, infinite scale basically. And maybe you could say that about like influencer marketing or communities or something. Like I do feel like communities now, even before like a shared wallet that holds cryptocurrencies, have a way greater amount of power than they ever had before, because they can like, brands regularly bend to the will of their like customers and communities before our eyes on Twitter. And so that's also interesting. Like community or DAO, whatever term, I think these things are converging around like similar behaviors, which is like groups of people coordinating and having like real influence and power. Mm-hmm. And then I think the question becomes like, how, like, what do you do with that? Like, how do you become an expert on how these groups are organizing? Because I feel like that's only going to get more important for like, a while, maybe like decades.
Yeah. I feel like, I'd be curious to hear both of your thoughts on, regarding coordinating these groups of people as these DAOs become larger and larger. How do you actually have governance at scale? How do you make sure people feel like they have a voice and that they're active in the community, just because there's a lot of noise? Would be curious to hear if you have any opinions there.
So one thing I've been thinking about here is like social scalability is something we talk a lot about in the broader crypto ecosystem and how that might work within governance. And I imagine that reputation will play an even larger role in how governance evolves, just, as on-chain reputation becomes more of a thing. I just don't know if DAOs are going to be as flat as they are today, where, it'll always be open access, but you'll kind of know that there's potentially different reputation levels that contribute differently, or, roles that are assigned within like this collective. So I think that's kind of how I see the future evolving.
Spot on. Yeah, I think that's a great distinction between open access versus flat structure, which don't necessarily need to be the same thing. I think even like Balaji had a cool post a while ago about like network unions and the idea of like, well, I guess one solution to this is like voting delegation, right? Of the idea of like, not everyone is going to be super engaged and not everyone is going to be an expert on like big decisions that are happening. And so being able to forward your own voting power to a delegate and have kind of voting power kind of pass through a whole network and end up, you know, a little bit more concentrated about them, hopefully around the most active, you know, qualified people, is one way to kind of break out of just like a completely flat hierarchy. And then I think, yeah, I guess like another thing that's tricky about like just groups of people who are like democratically voting around action is what level of granularity do you vote on, right? Like if, you know, we're building a product in Party DAO, right? So like if we were voting on like what color blue should the button be, okay, cool, like what typeface should we use, it would take years to build the product. And so I think you know, an obvious decision is like, have democratic decision making happen for like broad strokes of action, wherein you then appoint a smaller group or even a centralized individual to coordinate much more dynamically for a constrained period of time, and then let it go back to people to kind of assess, do we want to do that again? This is what happened with, you know, on a much larger scale, actually, the Uniswap grants program was just like, hey, let's approve a budget of a couple $1 million to run a grants program, and let's just appoint these 6 people to run it. But after 2 quarters, we will assess if we even want to continue that. And you could even, you know, democratically elect those people or whatever. But I think this is, yeah, maybe something to decide like upfront with a DAO or a community or like whatever you're doing. If you're bringing people together to do something, is like early on, try to decide like what level does it make sense to vote on things, and what level should we just like appoint people to run the stuff for like constrained periods of time.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. Regarding delegation, I really liked how Gitcoin approached it with their token distribution that just happened, where there was 100% delegation to start. So like even before claiming your airdrop, you had to delegate to someone. So I really like that. That's just moving things forward from the start. So awesome. Well, I want to leave time for audience Q&A. So I think Kartik is moderating that piece too. Kartik, are you going to be joining? Otherwise, I can keep going with questions.
Hey, sorry, Kartik, I'm taking over for Kartik from the global team. Yeah, I mean, we can definitely go on for questions. If you have more to add, feel free to go. We still have about like 10-15 minutes to go on. Max, over things. Let me just try to see if there's any questions from the chat. While I'm looking into that, you can go for another one.
I can add one thing just onto the, I actually wrote this down before the talk because I wanted to say this about, you know, this idea around like, how do you get active engagement and make sure that, you know, a DAO or a group of people is like, you know, staying high participation. I think one big thing there is to keep the questions of governance and process at the forefront of the conversation within a DAO or, you know, community Discord or whatever. Like the questions of like, this is a lot of these things I think are obviously still very early on, and I don't think anyone has fully figured out like how to perfectly run like decentralized governance over anything. And so I feel like the main pitfall you can fall into is like, you establish some process up front and it's okay, like it's probably a good starting point, but now you're like a few months into your org and no one has like gone back to question like, how do we feel about how this process is going? Is this working? Is it moving fast enough? Are people engaged? Do they feel like they have a voice in the system? Though I feel like people need to like, maybe my big takeaway, like easiest takeaway from this would be like, set a Discord bot reminder that says like, discuss governance process and ask how it's going would be the biggest thing. Cause even though we're all on like a panel here, I don't think anyone really has like the perfect answer for this stuff. So I would say like, have the community itself ask itself how governance is going pretty frequently and iterate and see how things improve. yeah, I wanted to say that and forgot to. So
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I think also there's constant improvement by different projects as they launch their DAOs and how they're going about it. Like Ribbon also, they launched their tokens and it's non-transferable to start. And like, there's all kinds of different experiments. So I think it's a great idea to like pull from different projects and watch how their experiment has gone and kind of iterate in your own DAO. So I think that's fantastic advice. Were there any questions?
Yeah, well, one of the questions that is there is, how do the DAO prevent tyranny of the majority? From someone from the chat. I don't know if anyone has a thought on that or something to add on that level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have some potential bad incidents in the world of DAOs where maybe somebody comes in and there's a bad actor, or you know, these like cartels kind of form. I do think as DAOs get larger and more open, it's more difficult to coordinate that type of an attack. So let's just say it's like a smaller one and there's, you know, 50 people or something. That's definitely more doable than like thousands of people as we have in some of the DeFi DAOs. But I think we'll probably need to institute some checks and balances that we just don't necessarily have yet, to kind of make sure that these types of things don't happen on the social coordination level.
yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I guess the big lesson, like, I guess if you're truly fully decentralized, like you can't, like the tyranny of the majority is kind of like what will rule. And that would be something like Bitcoin, where like you can't decide who, or Ethereum, like any like L1 currency would just be like, you can't decide who gets it if they can buy it, and like you can't decide what they do with it. But you know, so they're actually like the majority is kind of like it in power in some way, but like Kinjal said, it's hard for the majority to coordinate. And then if there is like a coordinated majority or minority that is upset about the tyranny of the other or something, then that's usually like voiced by exit, which is like people will actually fork a community. And like we're certainly going to see that happen at some point. Like at some point, I'm sure this already happens with subreddits. Actually, like someone was telling me today about like the FIRE subreddit, which is like an early retirement. It's like financial, man, it's embarrassing that I don't know the acronym, but something retire early. It's like a community that's focused on building, you know, productive financial plans for getting rich and retiring. But like there's now r/FatFire, which is like they basically forked the community because they were frustrated at how like nitpicky responses in the other were. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw this for something like a DAO or something like a brand community or something in the future. And I'm personally like excited to see what would happen there when something had originated from like a central authority, but then, you know, someone like usurped that or forked a social group.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen a lot. Just because the barriers to entry to join a DAO or even start a DAO are so low, and everything's so transparent and on chain, and you really kind of have to make sure you're treating your members well, or people are having a good experience. Otherwise, there's like always going to be maybe another DAO that they can join. And so it kind of reminds me of like sovereign individual, where it's like countries are competing for people, and so DAOs are going to be competing for talent. And I think that'll be interesting to see a bunch of forks.
Totally, yeah, it's spot on.
2 questions. We'll try to see if we can do both in the time allocated. If not, we'll figure out a nice transition. But maybe the first one is, as kind of all 3 of you, you've been part of a bunch of DAOs and you've participated in governance or proposals or just even some creative use cases of these DAOs. Is there a wish list for how you want that software itself to get better? Like I'm sure there's more than just voting you need. And if you look at something like Aragon, you have anywhere from financials in there to a member list. Like what will be the wish list of the software to manage these types of organizations? And what are your complaints on interacting with DAOs right now?
I feel pretty good about software right now. You know, combination of like in Party DAO's case, it's like a token gated Discord. So it's like Discord, Collabland, Snapshot for token weighted voting, and a Gnosis safe for you know, signing on and allocating funds to different things. I do think that multi-sig wallet software could get a lot better. Ability to bundle transactions would be really helpful. different consensus mechanisms that aren't just M of N signatures would be better, because a lot of the time signers can be busy, and so it can take like a week to like push funds out to something that actually like is urgent. And even really established, you know, programs within DeFi right now are like struggling with that. Even when there's millions of dollars on the line, like it's like can take 4 days to try to do something you needed to do in 12 hours. So I would just say like maybe just consensus mechanisms around multi-sig wallets would be the top thing. But I think the biggest stuff with DAOs, I mean, with the one DAO that I'm in, or the one thing that calls itself a DAO that I'm in, is more social problems than software problems. I think like these ideas around like what kind of process do we even invoke for making decisions still definitely does not feel like it's found like the optimal solution at all. So social software, I guess, is what you call that.
I would agree on the social piece. I'm a little bit of a boomer. Discord is not my favorite. I mean, I love it, but I also kind of hate just like the constant Discord chatter. And so I would love a governance tool that did like a better job of integrating like how we talk about a topic that's not Discord. But yeah, that's just.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, because it was like I'm in several DAOs, and they all use different forums and ways of communicating, and so I'm just like constantly switching back and forth between all of these and just getting like so many random messages, and it's really hard for me to keep up and manage that. So some way of like social organization and being able to track that would be super helpful.
Even Discord channel structure is not figured out. Like I'm a big advocate for like a decisions channel where like decisions are being made and then breaking other things out separately. But I feel like, you know, yeah, there could be a much better Discord template for this type of thing.
And Joel, John, and Linda, thank you so much for this awesome panel.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.